He used to say I was his entire world, back when scraped knees were the biggest problems we had, and my hugs could fix them all. I held his hand through every fever, every broken heart, every hard exam. I gave up nights, weekends, and holidays to make sure he had what he needed, and for years I told myself it was enough. That love, real love, would eventually be remembered. But now I know. Sometimes, even the deepest sacrifices become invisible if someone chooses not to see them, and that realization, it starts quietly, like a splinter beneath your skin. I was 27 when I married Graham Whitman. We didn't have much. He had a beat-up red truck and a laugh that filled up every room. But we were happy. We made do with hand-me-down furniture and a leaky roof. What we didn't have in money, we made up for in kindness. Our son Jeremy was born 2 years later. Graham cried harder than I did that day, cradling our boy like he'd just been handed the moon. And from that moment forward, everything I did revolved around that child. I didn't go back to work until Jeremy was 5. Even then, I chose a job close to home, a front desk clerk at the county hospital. It wasn't glamorous, but it had good hours, decent insurance, and let me be there when he came home from school. I made his lunches every morning. I was the mom who sat through school assemblies even when they ran an hour late, who clapped the loudest at spelling bees, who cried at every graduation, and I did it gladly. Because Graham passed unexpectedly when Jeremy was just 12. Heart failure. One morning, he kissed me goodbye, and that night, I was a widow. Jeremy didn't cry much, not right away. He was always trying to be brave for me, but I heard him at night, muffling sobs into his pillow. That's when I started picking up extra shifts. We had a small life insurance policy, nothing extravagant, but enough to keep the lights on. I refused to touch it for years. Instead, I worked weekends and some overnights at the pharmacy across town. I clipped coupons. I mended Jeremy's clothes myself. I didn't date. I didn't travel. Every penny went toward his future. When he got accepted to Vanderbilt, I sobbed right there in the hospital break room. He was so proud, so grateful. He said, "Mom, I'll make this count. I'll never forget what you've done for me." And I believed him. I sold my engagement ring to cover the deposit. I took out a small loan under my name for his textbooks. And when the part-time scholarship didn't quite cover year 3, I went back to overnight shifts. I was tired, but proud. The house we lived in wasn't fancy, but it had character. It sat on a small hill just outside Knoxville with old oak trees and creaky steps that Graham used to joke were part of the home's charm. I kept it up on my own, repainting rooms when the walls chipped, mowing the lawn on Saturdays, planting marigolds and hydrangeas out front every spring. That house was mine, not just because my name was on the deed, but because I'd poured myself into every corner of it. Graham may have helped pick it, but I built that place to be our foundation, and after he was gone, I held it all together for Jeremy. He came home after college briefly, between med school and residency. I remember making his favorite stew, setting the table with the good plates, lighting candles even though it wasn't a holiday. He barely touched the food, said he was tired. That was the first time I realized he didn't need me the same way anymore. Still, I didn't mind. I told myself that's what motherhood was supposed to be, helping them fly, even if it meant watching from below. He got married 5 years later to a woman named Talia, smart, beautiful, confident in a way I'd never quite been. I welcomed her with open arms. She brought gluten-free cookies to our first dinner together and commented that the house smelled like old furniture. I laughed it off. Maybe she didn't mean anything by it. When they asked to move in temporarily after Jeremy's contract fell through, I didn't hesitate. I cleared out the guest room, repainted the walls, even replaced the old mattress. Talia said she liked soft gray tones, so I swapped out the curtains. I made space for them, not just in the house, but in my routine, my rhythm. And when I started to notice the little changes, Jeremy forwarding the bills to his name, Talia suggesting we modernize the living room, I told myself it was normal, natural. Families evolve. I had no idea I was being slowly erased. The kitchen I once danced in while making pancakes for a sleepy-eyed boy became sterile. The living room, where I hung every handmade ornament Jeremy crafted in first grade, now looked like a catalog photo. Minimal, cold. My photos disappeared from the mantel one by one, replaced by sleek black and white shots of them in Paris, Prague, wherever. But I said nothing. Because isn't that what good mothers do? Stay silent. Stay supportive. Stay convenient. Looking back, I should have seen it sooner. The small dismissals, the patronizing smiles, the way they'd exchange glances when I offered opinions. Talia started calling me Marge instead of Mom, even though I never asked her to. Jeremy used to ask about my back pain, my doctor's appointments. Now he didn't notice when I stopped going, but I noticed. Every moment of being overlooked, ignored, managed like I was a tenant in my own home. It carved something into me. Not bitterness, not yet, just absence. And when a person gives too much for too long without being seen, something shifts. I didn't know it yet, but this wasn't just a sad story. It was the beginning of a revenge story. One quiet, steady, and written on my terms. Because love isn't a license to be erased. And gratitude? If it has to be begged for, it was never real to begin with. The email came on a Tuesday, mid-morning. I was sitting in the sunroom, watching the birds fight over the feeder I'd just refilled, sipping a lukewarm cup of tea when I heard the alert on my phone. I hadn't expected anything important, mostly grocery coupons and reminders from my pharmacy. But this one came from a name I didn't recognize. Hargrave Legal Team, subject line, transfer timeline, Whitman property. At first, I thought it was spam. Then I saw the body of the message. Jeremy's position should be secured by the end of the month. If the deed is updated by then, we can avoid further review. I'll attach the language for the transfer. She won't fight it. She's emotionally dependent and manageable. Let's confirm by Friday. My hands shook. I blinked, sure I was misreading. But then I saw the trail of emails before it. An entire back and forth chain. Drafts of deed documents. Strategies. Talia writing things like, "She thinks we're doing her a favor. Let her believe it until we lock it in. She signed the Christmas check without reading last year. She'll do it again. Jeremy says guilt still works if we bring up the tuition. They were planning it. Right here, in my house, under my roof. The roof I patched. The floor I refinished. The mortgage I carried for 26 years without a missed payment. I couldn't even feel my face. Just a quiet buzzing in my ears like wind blowing through hollow walls. I scrolled to the bottom and realized Talia must have used my Wi-Fi, synced her phone to the house printer, and somehow this message had also copied to the old email tied to the router, the one I'd forgotten I even had access to. They didn't even bother to check. They didn't think I was paying attention. They didn't think I mattered enough to be careful. That night, I said nothing. I cooked dinner like usual, made a small salad, reheated the casserole they didn't eat, said they were meeting friends. I smiled, cleared their plates, put foil over the leftovers. Sat at the table alone with the same quiet ache in my chest that had grown heavier with every season. I looked around the kitchen, the same one where Jeremy once painted his first Mother's Day card with glitter and sticky hands. Now it was filled with Talia's matching spice jars and her new backsplash tiles. There was nothing of me here anymore, not even my tea mugs. I printed every email, every attachment, put them in a manila folder and slid them into the drawer under the placemats. And then I sat. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just sat. Still. I wonder if any of you watching have ever had that moment when you realize the people you gave your whole heart to were only pretending to hold it back. Maybe you felt it on a holiday when no one called. Or in your own living room, when someone made a decision without even asking if you existed in it. If that's you, even once in your life, tell me in the comments you're not alone. The next morning, Talia passed me in the hallway and smiled. "We should talk about repainting the upstairs," she said. "Neutral colors, something more resale-friendly." Resale-friendly? That's when I knew for sure. They weren't just trying to ease me out. They were flipping the whole board. A few days later, I overheard Jeremy on the phone with someone. I assume his boss or board contact. He was talking about an ideal presentation, how the optics of family stability helped his candidacy. He said, "Having my mother under our care shows leadership. It'll land well in the press packet." Under their care? He had no idea what that sounded like, what it meant. I had never felt more invisible. Not even when Graham died, and I stood alone at the funeral making the decisions no widow is ever ready to make. Not even when I worked 3 jobs to cover Jeremy's second year of med school, skipping meals and lying about it so he wouldn't worry. This wasn't just betrayal, this was erasure. And worse, it was designed to look like love. They were turning me into a dependent in the very home I built, so they'd never have to struggle like I did. And the cruelty wasn't in what they were taking, but in the quiet certainty that I'd let them, that I was too small now to matter. One night, Talia left a draft document on the printer by accident. It was labeled, Proposal, Room Reassignment Plan. Inside was a diagram of the upstairs with primary bedroom, Jeremy and Talia, and guest room, Marjorie, in smaller font. There wasn't even a door marked for me, just a line that said, Shared bath available in hallway. I folded it neatly and slid it into the folder with the others. That weekend, Jeremy brought up the idea of putting my name on a joint account to help manage household bills. Said it would make everything cleaner. I smiled and said I'd think about it. And that night, I sat at my desk, opened a fresh notebook, and wrote one sentence at the top of the page. They think I'm sleeping. I'm not. I was wide awake now, and so was the part of me I'd buried years ago. The woman who survived loss, rebuilt from nothing, and had never been anyone's fool. They mistook my kindness for weakness. But I wasn't weak. I was watching. And soon, I'd move in silence, with more power than either of them ever gave me credit for. It didn't happen all at once. If it had, I might have screamed, might have slammed a door, maybe even said something that could have shocked them into silence. But slow loss is harder to name, and even harder to fight. It drips like water, a steady leak under the floorboards until one day everything caves in and you don't even remember what it looked like before. I noticed it in the little things at first, the family photos that disappeared from the hallway wall, the one from Jeremy's 3rd birthday with frosting on his cheek, the one Graham took of us on the porch, my hair in a messy bun and Jeremy in his favorite red overalls. They were gone, replaced with neutral art prints and a large sterile canvas that said, Home is where love grows. I wanted to laugh, because nothing in that house felt like love anymore. The hallway I painted soft blue when Graham passed, a color I once found calming, was suddenly cream. Not just any cream, Talia's cream, a tone she called almond breeze. She painted it while I was at church. Didn't even ask, just sent me a text. Thought the walls could use a refresh. Hope you like it. I stood in front of them that afternoon, stunned. The scent of paint still lingered in the air. She hugged me from behind, like she had done something kind. It looks lighter now, she said. Less heavy. I didn't say a word. They started calling it our house around the same time. I'd be standing by the sink and hear Jeremy say, We should replace these cabinets. Or, We've been thinking about getting a new stove. We, not Mom, not her house, just them. Jeremy rerouted the mail. At first it was just in case something important comes. Then suddenly, my name wasn't even on the bills. The electric company started calling me Mrs. Whitman Jr. One day, a delivery man showed up with a package labeled Talia Whitman, homeowner. I didn't correct him, because by then I had started fading. My presence in that house had become a shadow, convenient only when they needed it, awkward when they didn't. It wasn't just the space, it was the sound. They talked over me, around me, sometimes right in front of me like I wasn't there. I'd enter the kitchen and the conversation would stop. Jeremy would glance at his phone. Talia would stir her coffee a little faster. No one asked about my day. No one noticed when I stopped drinking tea at breakfast or when I stopped sitting in the sunroom altogether. And the worst part? I let them. I let them because the alternative, confrontation, felt exhausting. I was 74, I'd lived through loss, through labor, through the quiet undoing of a body that once held a home together. I didn't want to fight for a seat at the table I built, but I felt it, the smallness, the slow shrinking of my identity, like a coat being peeled off, layer by layer, until I stood there as nothing but their inconvenience. One night, I found Talia in my bedroom, measuring the walls. "We were thinking this might make a great nursery," she said cheerfully. "Of course, you'd still have the guest room. It's cozier anyway." She patted my hand like I was a guest in my own bed. Jeremy didn't look up from his phone. It was already decided. That night, I laid awake and stared at the ceiling, the room I'd shared with Graham, the windows he sealed during that blizzard in '97. The way we used to lie here and listen to the crickets, sometimes laughing over nothing, sometimes crying over everything. Every inch of this room had been built on something sacred, and now it was just a square on a floor plan in Talia's vision board. I reached into the nightstand and pulled out a letter, the one Jeremy wrote from college his first semester. The ink had faded, but the words hadn't. "You're the strongest person I know, Mom. I'll take care of you one day like you've always taken care of me, I promise." I read it twice, folded it neatly, slid it under the folder of printed emails, because a promise means nothing to someone who's learned to forget. The next day, they hosted a dinner party, friends from Jeremy's new job. I wasn't invited to join, just asked to help with the hors d'oeuvres and maybe stay upstairs for the night just for some privacy. I stayed in the guest room and listened through the vent. I heard Talia laughing, heard Jeremy say things like, "We're finally making the place ours." The place, not the home, not my home, just a property, a building, an asset, and maybe that's what I had become to them, an asset to manage, a relic to move around, not a mother, not a woman, just a burden they hadn't figured out how to legally remove yet. When I finally fell asleep, I dreamt I was floating through my own house, but everything was blurry. Every frame was crooked, every chair too unfamiliar. I tried to reach for the front door, but it wasn't there anymore. When I woke up, I didn't cry. I went to the kitchen, made coffee, and drank it standing by the window. I looked out at the garden I'd tended for 30 years. The flowers had changed. So had I. I wasn't angry, I wasn't broken, but I was empty. And that emptiness, it wasn't from loss, it was from giving everything and still being disposable. And that, I think, is the worst kind of grief, when you're not even mourned while you're still alive. It was the quiet that gave me space to think. Not the kind of quiet you get on a lazy Sunday morning, but the kind that settles in when you're surrounded by people and still feel completely unseen. The kind of quiet that hums like a refrigerator late at night, steady, unshakable, a low reminder that something is off and has been for a long time. I'd gotten used to being quiet. That's how mothers survive sometimes, by swallowing what they want to say for the sake of peace. But this silence wasn't peace. It was erasure. That Tuesday morning, I pulled out the deed. It was in the fireproof lockbox under my bed. I'd kept it there for years, tucked between Graham's old service papers and Jeremy's birth certificate. I hadn't looked at it in ages, not because I forgot about it, but because I trusted it, trusted what it meant, that this house was mine, that what I built would be respected, honored. I laid the paper flat on the table, smoothed the crease in the center, and read every line like I'd never seen it before. My name. Only my name. No co-signers. No liens. No shared ownership. No one else's claim. And something in me, something that had been bent and quiet for too long, sat up straighter. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt still. Not the frozen kind, not the helpless kind, the anchored kind, like my feet had finally found ground again. Later that day, I called Joanna Langston. Joanna wasn't just a lawyer. She was someone who once cried with me at Graham's funeral. She was the person who helped me set up my first checking account after he passed, who dropped off soup when Jeremy had pneumonia in second grade. If there was anyone who could help me untangle this mess, it was her. I didn't make an appointment. I just showed up. She took one look at my face and didn't ask why. "Coffee?" she offered, already reaching for the chipped blue mug she kept on her desk. I nodded. She poured, then gestured to the chair. I sat down and slid the folder across the desk. The emails, the room plans, the printed deed. I need to know where I stand, I said quietly. She opened the folder and started reading. Her expression didn't change much, but her eyes darkened with every page. You own it outright, Marjorie, she said at last, setting the deed down gently. No joint names, no legal transfers. Everything you've shown me, it's strategy, not law. Then I want out, I said, on my terms, clean, quiet, fast. She leaned back. You sure? I nodded. I'm not asking for revenge, I'm asking for air. She didn't smile, but I saw something shift in her posture, a readiness. She opened her legal pad and started scribbling notes. Questions, deadlines, protections. By the end of the hour, I had a roadmap, not just to sell the house, but to preserve my dignity. We both knew that confronting them head-on wouldn't work. People like Talia win in loud fights. They twist logic into guilt and shame. But this wasn't a fight. This was a decision. And the beauty of quiet decisions is that no one can interrupt them. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at the dining table long after the lights were off, hands wrapped around a cold mug of chamomile tea I never drank. I looked at every object in that house like it was the last time. And maybe it was. The next morning, I started small. I called Marcus Doyle, a realtor Joanna recommended. Discreet, experienced, quick. He didn't ask many questions, said he could line up a few buyers quietly off market. I packed only what mattered. Graham's old chair, my favorite cookbook with the pages stained from decades of dinners, Jeremy's baby blanket, the one he used to carry around until he was 4 and embarrassed. Everything else? I made peace with letting it go. Talia noticed the missing photos 2 days later. Did you take down the family pictures? She asked. I'm cleaning out drawers, I said. Too much dust. She didn't press. Why would she? In her mind, I was already fading. Just an old woman with too much time and too many memories. Jeremy barely looked up anymore. He was busy preparing for his upcoming board meeting. It's a big step, he told me. If this goes through, I'll be the youngest director in the region. I nodded. You must be proud. He didn't notice the double meaning. Later that week, I stood in the doorway of what used to be my bedroom, the one they now called the future nursery. I imagined pastel walls, the smell of baby powder, a new generation being raised in a house built on bones they refused to acknowledge. And I knew I wouldn't be there to see it, not because I didn't care, but because it wasn't mine anymore. The house was still legally mine, but the heart of it, that had already been rewritten in someone else's handwriting. And that realization didn't break me. It freed me. Because love, given freely, doesn't mean you owe people your silence. And being a mother doesn't mean sacrificing your whole self on the altar of someone else's comfort. I wasn't leaving because I was bitter. I was leaving because I refused to shrink any further. They thought I was asleep, thought I was soft, thought they could paint over my name inch by inch until it disappeared. But I was still here, and I was about to show them exactly how loud silence could be. I didn't leave in the middle of the night. I didn't slam doors or make a scene. That's not how dignity works. It doesn't need fireworks. It just needs follow-through. Marcus found a buyer within a week, a retired couple from Asheville. They loved the porch, the old oak tree, the way the sunlight filtered into the kitchen. I didn't tell them what had happened inside that house. That wasn't part of the sale. What mattered was that they saw the home for what it still could be, not what it had become. Joanna walked me through every legal step. Quiet title, clean transfer, no complications. Jeremy and Talia weren't on any paperwork, never had been. And so, they weren't owed a warning. I didn't tell them I was leaving. I didn't leave a note on the fridge or call a family meeting. I simply began packing what I had brought into the house all those years ago. My books, my linens, my wedding china, a box of letters Graham had written me during our first year of marriage, when we were broke and too tired to do much but dream. I took the Afghan my mother crocheted before her hands gave out. I left the new towels Talia insisted on buying for guests, the fancy dish rack she brought home from some online sale, the throw pillows she arranged like no one was meant to touch them. I hired a moving company for one afternoon. One truck. Everything labeled, everything wrapped. What wasn't mine was sorted, boxed, and placed in a rented storage unit just outside town. I prepaid for 6 months, left the code in a sealed envelope, and on my last morning there, I stood in the kitchen one final time. I didn't cry. I looked at the counters I'd scrubbed down after school bake sales, the stove I'd used to make Jeremy's favorite peach cobbler every year on his birthday, the wall where his growth chart still faintly showed, even beneath Talia's almond breeze paint. And then I left a note. Just a single piece of paper, written in blue ink, placed neatly beside the keys. A burden did this. I locked the door from the inside, walked through the garage, and closed it behind me. As I drove away, the streets blurred like a painting caught in the rain. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. What I needed was ahead of me, not behind. I settled in Charlottesville. A furnished apartment, quiet neighborhood, 2 blocks from the river. The walls were white, empty, blank in a way that felt like possibility, not absence. For the first time in years, I had mornings that weren't built around someone else's expectations. I drank my tea while it was still hot. I read full chapters of books without getting up to answer a knock or clean someone else's mess. I slept through the night, no thumps from upstairs, no footsteps pacing outside my door, just me, my breath, my quiet. The phone calls came 3 days later. First Jeremy, then Talia, then Jeremy again. Missed call, voicemail, text. Mom, the keys aren't working. Did you change the locks? Where are you? I didn't answer. Talia's tone changed in message number 4. Sweet, syrupy, concerned. We're just worried. Please call. Just let us know you're safe. Safe. That made me laugh, not out loud, just a soft exhale, because for the first time in years, I was. Later that evening, Jeremy left the voicemail that told me everything I needed to know. We found the note. I don't know what you think you heard, but you've made a huge mistake. This is our home too, and you had no right. We're talking to a lawyer. You've really done it this time. I saved that one. Not because I needed it, but because it reminded me why I left. Why I stopped explaining. Why silence had become the clearest boundary I'd ever drawn. A week later, they demanded a meeting. The message was short. 10:03 a.m., Cafe on Main. If you don't show, we're coming to your office. So I showed. I arrived at 10:05, not to be late, but to make it clear I was no longer on their schedule. They were already seated, mugs untouched, faces tight with some version of anger they hadn't earned. I didn't greet them. I simply sat down, placed my phone face up on the table, and hit play. Their voices filled the space. She's emotionally dependent. Just bring up the tuition. Ding! Once we're on the deed, we can renovate. We'll take the master bedroom. Talia paled. Jeremy stared down at his hands. When the audio ended, I looked at them for the first time and said, No, I didn't misunderstand. I finally understood. Talia leaned forward, her voice quiet and sharp. You blindsided us. I nodded. It was never yours. Jeremy said, After everything we've done for you, I didn't blink. Yes, and you taught me exactly what not to become. I stood, slid a small envelope across the table. Storage code, itemized list, nothing more. There's no money, no forwarding address, no access, no second chances. Jeremy clenched his jaw. I'm your son. I met his eyes. And I was your mother, not your asset. Neither of them said a word as I walked away. Back in my new kitchen, I brewed tea. Real tea, hot, strong, the kind you don't forget on the counter. And in that small apartment surrounded by things no one had tried to take, I started again, not with noise, but with peace. Because sometimes healing doesn't come after the storm. Sometimes it's what happens when you leave the storm behind you entirely. The quiet in my new apartment felt different. It wasn't the aching kind I used to fill with chores or someone else's comfort. It was soft, still, unbothered. No shoes to trip over by the front door, no voices muffled through the ceiling, no one slamming cabinets like punctuation marks to arguments I wasn't part of. I made tea every morning, hot, not half forgotten. I sat by the window, watched the light shift through the day. Some mornings I didn't speak to a soul, and I liked it that way. But I didn't disappear. A few weeks after I moved in, I found a small community center down the road. They held weekly groups, grief support, boundary rebuilding, even art nights for widows and single women starting over. I wasn't sure why I walked in that first time. Maybe I just wanted to be somewhere that didn't expect anything from me. Maybe I wanted to be seen again, but on my own terms. We didn't talk about sons and daughters directly, not at first, but the stories came. One woman's daughter had blocked her after a wedding invitation dispute. Another had been moved into a senior facility without notice, and another simply said, he stopped calling the day he got promoted, like I was part of a phase he outgrew. I didn't offer advice. I just listened. And one night, when I did speak, all I said was this: sometimes the silence we give back is the most honest answer we have left. A woman named Sabria approached me after one of the meetings. She ran a transitional home for single mothers nearby. We could use someone like you, she said, not to fix things, just to sit and talk, tell the truth. I started going every Friday afternoon. At first, I brought cookies, then stories. Not the bitter ones, not the whole tale, just little pieces about how love can't survive on guilt and how being a mother isn't the same as being owned. They listened. We laughed, cried sometimes, but we never pitied. That was the rule. No one there was broken. We were all just rebuilding in different stages. Time moved without announcement. There were no big changes, no dramatic declarations, just steady days, honest ones. I never called Jeremy. He never called me. That silence became its own kind of closure, a wall neither of us tried to climb. A year passed. I realized it one morning when the first yellow leaf dropped outside my window. Autumn, Paul's favorite season. Jeremy's too, when he was little. I used to rake piles of leaves just so he could jump into them, his laughter echoing through the yard. I made a cup of tea, sat at the kitchen table. No one expected anything from me that day. No phone calls, no plans. I opened my journal and wrote a letter, not to Jeremy, not to Talia, just to me. You were never a burden. You were the foundation. You carried what no one saw. You gave more than anyone ever gave back. And when they tried to reduce you to your usefulness, you walked away, not out of anger, but clarity. I signed it. No flourish, no apology. Later that afternoon, I went for a walk. The breeze carried that crisp edge fall always brings. I didn't mean to go near the old neighborhood, but somehow my feet found their way without asking. When I reached the street, I slowed, not to look back, but to pass through. The house stood there, familiar but distant. Someone had painted the door a deep red. The porch had new furniture. Wind chimes I didn't recognize danced softly in the breeze. It didn't hurt like I thought it would. I didn't linger. I didn't hope for someone to peek through the window and see me standing there. I just kept walking because I didn't lose my son. I lost the version of him I wanted to believe in. The boy who would never turn away. The man who'd remember the hands that built his world. What I let go of wasn't a child. It was the illusion that he saw me. And what I found in the space left behind was myself. Not the woman I had been, not the mother I tried to be, but someone quieter, wiser, not broken, just finally unburdened. If you've ever had to walk away without closure, if you've ever been erased in a house you helped build, if your silence ever felt louder than all the years of giving, tell me in the comments below. You're not alone. Sometimes the most powerful revenge story isn't about making noise. It's about choosing peace no one can take from you.